Good evening. My name is Thurman Greco, and the name of this program is Let's Live with Thurman Greco, and it comes to you from scenic downtown Woodstock, New York, Channel 23 Educational TV, as well as on YouTube with Let's Live with Thurman Greco. And this evening we have a very special guest. This is your third visit, and she's a very important Woodstock personality. We have Linda Diamond, and she's here. We are so fortunate to have her, and this is our third visit. So tell us, Linda, what do we have for this evening?
Well, as you know, or maybe our audience doesn't know yet, my group is called Linda Diamond and Company. It's a modern dance group that does multicultural and visual arts themes in dance. And we're getting ready for the annual Woodstock Diamond Dance and Music Festival. And we're hoping to have live music as well at the opening reception, which will be 5:30 p.m. on June 10th, Saturday. I hope you'll tell your friends. And on Sunday, June 11th at 2:30 for people who like to get there and leave early for the next day's work or whatever. We really hope that you'll attend because we're going to have a different repertory, which we always like to vary, and we're excited about being able to continue for over 2 decades in spite of the pandemic. We only had 1 year that we were not able to do a program, but the next following year, 2 years ago, we were able to have a tent outdoors. So we love to present these programs and hope that our viewers and newcomers to Woodstock, as well as people who live here, will come and support the art of dance, because we are here to really exchange and share the importance of this field, especially what we do, which is contemporary modern dance. And we have many different themes that I think people can relate to. And I explained to the dancers that one of the important missions is for us to be able to communicate. So when they rehearse, I tell them, you have to open your eyes and send out expression, because that's part of the movement as well. We're not just working in a little box. So I combine that aspect in the actual rehearsal. And as I said, the works are very varied, and it's a lot of fun. We just learned today wonderful news that Stewart's Shops Foundation is going to support us with a contribution, as well as our local Ulster Savings Bank of Woodstock has offered a contribution to help combine and continue this. And it really means a lot to us. So any funding or personal contributions mean a lot, because it shows support. And for an artist, it doesn't matter how much it is. It shows that people believe in what your mission is, and the mission is to bring art to everybody in the community. So the program is also very suitable for children, as long as they bring an adult, and people of all ages. And the interesting thing I think about my work is that you don't have to be knowledgeable about what modern dance is, because there's always something for everyone. And we really like to do that. We try to have it as eclectic and versatile as possible. And of course the costumes are very colorful, as you can imagine, knowing me. And I have a lot of fun with that, because really I can't even thread a needle because I can't see it. However, I do have ways of combining different fabrics and ready-made items, and I transpose them into costumes for the stage. And usually that has to do with, I go around not expecting to find anything, just like if you went to a museum or a thrift shop, not expecting to find a specific thing. And sometimes they have these sales, and they usually have things that nobody would ever wear on the street, and those are usually perfect for the stage. So many times, they have bright colors and painted items on them, and it's just amazing. So I have a movable feast, so to speak, with my costumes, because they're entirely recyclable in the sense that we are able to sometimes lend or borrow costumes from one dance for another, because it's not like a period piece where something has to do with the 18th century. And I have a lot of fun with that, realizing how we can do something with very little. And I think the early pioneers that had been tutored by and taught and so on, when I read some of the books about their adventures, I say, gee, that's exactly what I have to do. And they talk about, times when they were only paid like $1 a class for a performance. They never got rehearsal money. And these are the really great people, and I'm talking about members of the Martha Graham Dance Company and Jose Limon and all of those great pioneers whose works are still standing today. They did a lot with very little. And of course, we would like to have funding. It doesn't mean we'll be happy not to have any funding. But when you really love the art, as I do, we continue regardless of whether we get a grant or not, or whether, things are going whatever. So I often, I don't exactly question myself, but lately I realize, some people say, well, why am I doing this? But it's because of the love and the passion for the art that we continue. And of course, the other mission for me personally is to really extend to the younger dancers the importance and the validity of a professional life in the field of dance. And I really believe in that, and I think that we need to contribute to our communities and help to uplift and heal, because that is also what the arts help to do. Especially in times like this, as well as other times, the importance of healing through the art of music, dance, art, and it's a way for people to get outside, away from their issues, their personal problems and whatever, and to, for some moment, to have a feeling of being in another world. That's what we like to offer. So I hope you'll tell your friends and visitors especially to come and see us, because we should have something on the Woodstock Chamber of Commerce listing, and we're a member of the Woodstock Chamber of Commerce and the Arts, as it used to be called, or still is. And it's very important to support our efforts, as well as others that are going to be happening around here, because I think that we like to know that there's the feedback. Many times people come and they say, oh, we've been here every season, and they come back, so that's a really nice sign too. And as I said, you don't have to be necessarily an aficionado of dance or knowledgeable about the particular genre that we work with. We like to be able to share that, and the whole idea is not to stay within our own little group, but on the contrary, to expand and to share the importance of the art of modern dance, which can express many different themes, and sometimes abstract ones, which I'll tell you about later. So that's part of what we're about. And it's going to be June 10th, Saturday, and ticket information is at 845-679-7757. And I have a poster here, but I can show it later if you'd like.
Okay, well, one of the things that's very, very important for me is that you are a legend in Woodstock.
I am?
Absolutely.
I didn't know that.
And I've been, this show's been going on for years, and it's extremely important that we contribute to your annual program, because whatever's going on in the world is also going on in Woodstock, and you know how to take it and turn it into something positive.
Thank you.
And what is the special focus this year?
Oh, that's a good question. Each piece is so different, but it's really joy, if I may say, because we have works. One work is by a famous woman composer, Tanya Leon, who had previously been the conductor for Alvin Ailey, as well as Dance Theater of Harlem, and she's won all kinds of awards. She's a Cuban composer, and she gave me permission to use one of her pieces, and so that one is the ladies are wearing hoop skirts, and it has more of a Caribbean Latin flair to it. And then there's another section of something called A Journey Through Her Mother's Heart, which was based on the former Woodstock artist Vita, who asked me to collaborate in dance, and composer Tom DeSisto, who's a Woodstock composer who has worked with me a lot. And so we have some of his music represented, and especially people like the section called House of Fun, where the dancers are dressed in circus character costumes, and it's a very light piece, and that section has music by Eric Satie. But for some reason, it appeals to adults as well as children. It just has a campiness about it. So another work is called Picassiette. Oh, and I have a picture of it on the flyer, which I'll show you. That is interesting because one of the dancers said, what is the name? How did you come across it? I said, well, it's based on Dance Visions of Picasso, a longer piece of mine, which has different sections. And in French, Picassiette means to take food off of somebody's plate. But I also learned there's a triple entendre, because one is Picasso, the name, Picassiette meaning taking food off the plate, and the third one I found out is an actual form of art called Picassiette, and it's used in American language. And what it is people who take broken mosaics and turn it into another form of art. So sometimes, you might see a table with pieces there. So even though I'm not literally using those ideas, the title that I decided to give it has other, suggested meanings. And then I have to mention, it's based on Picasso's art and Cubism. And when I was working on this, originally I found out that the Museum of Modern Art, coincidentally, was having an exhibit about that. And a Woodstock artist named Sabra Siegel took these old broken guitars that happened to show up in my theater. I don't know how they got there, but somebody left them there. And, and so we had her paint them. And it's in the picture, which I can show you here, if I may, on the flyer. And this is a picture of the upcoming performance, and also a picture of the costumes, which have another history to them, and the guitars. So it's an abstract work that is based on Cubist ideas. These are the guitars, and these costumes, believe it or not, are tan unitards. And then on sale, I got these tights that they looked sort of like blue denim or something, but I had them cut up because sometimes when you don't have enough costumes for everybody, you cut something in half and put it apart with somebody else. And so I designed this, and had one of the dancers a while back had sewn it on. But that's how we come up with our costuming, and sometimes it works, and I don't always have an exact rationale, but I throw things together in such a way, I guess, that somehow it makes sense later on, even though at the time people don't, they say, why are we doing this? You're putting one dress on top of another, and then you're taking a band and wrapping around my head, But I really love the dancers because they're very flexible in the sense of they're so open-minded, they don't have any censorship at all working with me. And if they had, they lose it quickly. Because, in other words, you have to roll with the style of what's going on. And I found with this group, there's always a turnover, but I have my main dancer, Nina Deacon, who's the principal dancer and assistant to the director, and she is just wonderful. She's been with me 10 years now, on and off, while doing other shows, of course. And so that work is called Picassiette, and then I have so many pieces, I have to remember what they all are. Oh yes, we have a piece called Las Escondidas, which is danced by two dancers whose names are Amina and Ellie. And Amina is from France, but she lives in New York now. And they are creating in this piece called Las Escondidas, which in Spanish means the hidden ones. It's based on ancient Sephardic history of people who were in exile, not through their own desire, but they were exiled from Spain, and they went to many different places. But the Las Escondidas also means that the people who stayed in Spain, who were actually Jewish and persecuted for that, they changed their religion. So there's a hidden meaning in that they remained, but they hid themselves, so they into a different identity. So, these stories of oppression continue even today, as we know, and without getting political, but it's a bit of history. And I think I'm often inspired by cultural aspects in music, such as the Sephardic traditional music in this work, Las Escondidas, has been passed on from generation to generation, so they don't really know who the original composer was. But it's true with a lot of the Negro spirituals as well, where people who were oppressed had their own music and they were able to somehow pass it on over the generations. So I find that fascinating, you know, the whole idea of where do we come from, who are we, where do we come from, and where are we going? That's a title from a painting by Gauguin, which always inspired me because I know it has a sort of existential question, right? But I use that in this new piece. Oh yeah, it's called Swamp. And that's another one with music by Tom DeSisto. And it's not necessarily literally about a swamp, but it takes its source of inspiration in a way. I just heard a program today that was very interesting about how children who are given work with a garden, they have a name for it. It was something like biophysio or some strange name, but it has to do with how plants and people feed each other. And my original concept was, of course, underlying it is the whole environmental issue without getting too heavy-handed or into that, but still being aware. And that the idea that we often hear, well, art often imitates nature, but sometimes nature shows art in it. You might see a tree, a trunk or something that looks like a dragon or whatever. So that phenomenon is very interesting, but the word swamp, evidently, when I looked it up, for certain cultures it's a spiritual concept about flowing water, and it's supposed to be healing, even though it's a swamp. But if it stays not moving, then it's stagnant and has a different connotation. But we don't get into literal things. We use that as a point of departure, and I have a demo, which I'll show at another time, of speaking to the dancers, and they'll be wearing these plants on top of their head that they're not the kind that wilt, you know, like this, but and then they have kind of, it's used symbolically. And I told them, which we're still working on it, I consider it still a work in progress, but the concept will evolve eventually, and it really has to do with honoring nature, and at the same time the ominous messages that we're getting from our environment are truly signals of, you know, alerts. And I talked to them a little about that so they would understand why they're doing these things, you know, because sometimes a choreographer doesn't always know. They just do things from the subconscious because it's a nonverbal art. Once, you know, once you're creating it, later usually you can analyze it, but while the person is involved in doing this work, they're not thinking, well, now this is going to symbolize that. And that. Later on, I found that I had symbols that I didn't purposely put in, but the subconscious is the editor and the decision maker when you allow yourself to let the child within. And that's an important ingredient at any age, because that's why the famous artists like George O'Keeffe and Matisse and Chagall and Picasso and many others, they kept the child within. That's why they were, you know, creating in their 80s and 90s, because they weren't worried about how old they were. They didn't even have a rocking chair. So that's, you know, part of the idea of, you know, the creative process really is coming from deep within, but I like to work with themes, and each theme is very different from the other.
Linda, how do you find the students?
Well, they're not students, they're dancers. They're professionals and they get paid. So that's a different category. They do study, they go running around. They're in New York mostly, because that's the place where they can take classes 7 days a week, which I used to do just about, you know.
So you go down to the city and recruit dancers?
Well, no, I have auditions, and they came here. We worked 4 days in Woodstock, which was wonderful because they could not get up and leave or look at the watch because they were stranded in Woodstock. And that, I always hoped I could someday manage to do that, and we did that over a long weekend. And it was wonderful because we really had an intensive time to get into the works. And even though there's a lot more to do now still in rehearsal, and, you know, it's ideal, but it's also, you know, expenses of keeping people that, you know, have other jobs and so on. So that was very fulfilling. And they seem to be very excited about it, and they stayed at a very nice Airbnb that
So
looked
you,
nice.
so you started out at the beginning of the season recruiting dancers.
Auditioning. Well, they're auditioned.
Okay,
Yeah.
so in music we call it an audition.
Yeah.
So you were
Dancing.
looking for your dancers. And how many are you going to end up with this year?
Well, it also has to do with budget. I'm one of them, by the way. I'm going to be in 2 pieces, hopefully, if I can practice my parts. There will be 4 dancers in addition to my doing 1 or 2 pieces, sections of that. Oh, there's another piece called Cielo, which means heaven and sky in Spanish, and in Italian it's called Cielo, Cielo, spelled the same way. And it's a tribute to my mentor, Anna Sokolow, who lived to be 90 and for whom I had a street named after at Christopher Street in Greenwich Village is renamed Anna Sokolow Way, which the mayor at the time was Mayor Bloomberg agreed to do that. And so I created a dance to tribute her memory, and my wonderful assistant Marty Horn, who does the visuals and videography, came up with some fantastic projections, which I don't want to give it away yet, but it really helped because the fire department of the building permit people made me unplug a lot of my lights because they were too many, whatever. And they were just makeshift lights. So the projections helped to create an entire ambiance, because it lights up the backdrop, which is white, and it creates the environment that helps to bring the message across. And that was another thing too. I was thinking about, we're working with very little technical stuff right now, but I'm used to that. As years went by, at the beginning, of my career, we used to be able to get a dressmaker, and we were able to have places with lighting, and then those things started to diminish because of funding and the situation. But the show must go on. So because I've had that kind of training, if you want to call it, I continue, and of course we would like to upgrade a lot, and hopefully we'll apply for more funding for that. But in the meantime, I like to say that the theater in a way is the bare bones, but not in a negative way, just to say that it's good for the dancers because when they walked in, many of them are used to like Alvin Ailey's theater or, places where they've been, and I said, welcome to Woodstock. This is Woodstock. This is the original Woodstock flavor, type of thing. And then they kind of, smile because, some people are pampered. I definitely was never pampered, personally or in my field. And having lived in Paris with very little and other places, somehow that was kind of like an underpinning for future work. Because when you've had to do a lot with very little, you become more resourceful, I guess, but you also learn how to make something out of things that normally wouldn't be used for that. So that's what I enjoy doing because I'm always trying to figure out how can we make this work. We have some other lights or we have these backdrops like these, to cover up the wires. I'm just giving the audience a little bit of the behind the scenes, and I'm not afraid to do so because it shows how we are persistent, resourceful, and continuing the art that we really believe in.
I think that's important that we covered that in this show, because if a person watches this show and then they buy the tickets and they go and actually see the productions in June, then they have a little bit of the backstory. And I think that gives you more.
Yes,
it really does.
It shows what the building blocks are, so to speak. Behind the scenes is always interesting to me also. If I ever see someone rehearsing in another country or whatever, and how they're dealt with, you learn about the persona and the personalities behind the scenes that keep it ticking. So thank you for recognizing that, because that's what we do, and I'm happy to say that we're still going forward.
And how many years have you been doing this now?
Well, I dropped a few traveling and driving, so to different countries. I would say about 3 decades, give or take.
3 decades?
Yeah, let's make that.
Well, that's a lot of experience that somebody who's joining you now and working with you now, these dancers, they're going to benefit from all of that. So not only do they have this presentation, but they have 30 years of your experience that they can absorb while they're learning.
I didn't think of that, but you're right. I mean, I think they're starting to get to know me, the new ones, you know, so they just, I want to say something on their behalf. What's very interesting is that I'm learning too, is that the extreme discipline and training in the class has a silent training that they don't speak of, and that is they don't say a word. So it's great. So if I say something, whatever, everybody listens and they don't ask questions, they don't raise their hand, nothing. They say nothing. And that's the way it has to be, because we don't have time. You know, it's not like in a college class where somebody, you know, they're encouraged to raise their hand, ask questions, discuss ideas. We don't have time for that. It may sound a little bit stringent, but I'll tell you, that's how you get it done. Because otherwise, I mean, I did have once, and this was a real sign of an amateur dancer. She was a very nice dancer, but she, you know, she said, "Do I put my right hand in front of the left knee or the left foot over on the right?" I said, "I don't know. I never thought that." You know, like it's you know, it's so. But that shows you, you know. But she was a scientist, so she probably, you know, needed to know the exact parameters. But normally, the real professionals, they do not say anything. They listen. And they might nod their heads or something, and then or sometimes they don't. They just have a blasé face, and they listen very carefully, and they're taking it in, but they're not like questioning or giving their ideas on it. But I tell them certain about imagery that I need to evoke, and then it helps them understand where it's coming from, which many times, you know, I'm sure I've been guilty of this too, but many times choreographers don't tell them, especially someone like Merce Cunningham, who was one of my gurus and teachers, and the dancers never knew what anything was about. They were just told, do this movement and that movement and whatever. And I've had dancers, after they see the video, say, "Oh, now we know what that was about," because they, you know, they were so busy learning their part and they weren't given a behind-the-scenes understanding. Now I find that I'm able to give them a little bit more about the concepts in advance so that they will bring that out artistically. And it's very important to bring out the artistry. So when my assistant, Nina Deacon, who's just wonderful, when she rehearses the dancers, you know, she mostly concentrates on what you do next, whatever. But if I'm sitting there, I have to stop everything because I don't like anything to look pedestrian, as we call it. So I'm more into, like, you have to put the oomph factor in it, you know, and I talk to them about that. That's something I made up. They don't teach you that in class, but the oomph factor, you can imagine, has to do with, you know, how you project and what you put in it, the motivation. And I've been taking a writing class with our illustrious Violet Snow and also Janine Maurer, who are both wonderful, and I've learned a lot of how the different arts and the composition ideas kind of relate, because they talk about motivation, you know, character, expression, resolution, conflict. Conflict is very important in writing, evidently, and also sometimes in dance as well. It doesn't mean each piece has to have that, but some of these concepts that interrelate with painting and writing and music are all kind of, you know, interwoven, excuse me. And I want to say again, on behalf of a wonderful composer, Tom DeSisto, who's been with me for about 15 years. He's also chairman of the board of Linda Diamond and Company, and he has kept my music in his archives on his computer for all these years. I didn't even ask him to do that. So if I tell, he said, "Well, what year was that, or what was the name?" And then he finds the music in case I can't find it. And I'm graduating now to having my technicians work with computer, you know, situations. I was always very distrustful of it. But I always believe in having a backup. And that's another thing, you know, I don't know if people who do plays and shows also have a backup. But I want to say I have an anecdote. Many years ago, I was directing a fashion show in Monte Carlo. And the company was Singer Sewing Machine. And of course they had a big budget, and I was hired. And, but I brought a very inexpensive, it was one of those tape recorders, you know, that cost $25 in the old days, you know, and you put a cassette in. So I had the rehearsal music on that, and then when we got to the place, Loewy's Monte Carlo, a very famous place in, you know, the area where the show was going to be, their equipment didn't work because they forgot that the French system had a different, you know, whatever they call it. And so I said, go buy me some batteries. And we ran the whole show from my little $25 tape recorder with a cassette. And they hooked it into the sound speakers, you know. And, you know, it was fine for me. But I always remember that because it's good to have a backup. And many times when people laugh at me, you know, oh, you're doing that, and then their thing doesn't work, and then mine does, you know, that type of thing. So it's important to have duplicates of the music, and in case something goes wrong, you know, I've been in situations where somebody's computer just went on the blink, and then what do? They had to, you know. But if you have a backup sitting right there, it can be an old-fashioned boombox with your CD, whatever, it's very good because invariably, you know, sometimes something happens, you know, either with electricity or whatever. And I have done things like that where I was happy that I, you know, thought of that or had even usually an old-fashioned means of, you know, producing that type. And when I did something once based on a documentary I was doing about Ruth St. Denis, a famous choreographer who was at the beginning of Jacob's Pillow, which now exists for many years. I think the camera lady, we had borrowed a camera from the town of Woodstock. I don't know if they still do that. But something went wrong, and then I brought something, I think she ran out of battery. But I brought a long extension board and a little cheap thing, and then they were going to do the photo session. I said, oh goody, they're going to be standing still. So I had my camera, you know, with the long extension board, and my wonderful Ellen Colville, who's the producer of this program, of Thurman Greco's, she did the editing, which was fantastic. But I remember that the director of Adelphi University, where we went, he said, oh, you know, you have very professional people. We don't have people like that. And I couldn't believe it because we were working with makeshift equipment and extension cords, because I was afraid he was going to say, oh, you know, this is very amateur, but it wasn't. The product came out really well. But I love those types of situations because, again, it reconfirms the importance of being able to have different alternative items. And you should always expect, you know, invariably, not just Murphy's Law, but, you know, once in a while something will not work. But then if you have another backup, I even have, like when I have extra costumes, I say these are the extra costume, you know, the emergency costumes in case something happens, you know, where somebody can't, the zipper doesn't work, or they're too, you know, they can't fit into it, or they can't get out of it, you know, things like that. But that reminds me of another funny story. You know, someone said, well, we'll put a safety pin. I said, no, no safety pins. Why? Because once we had two dancers, and they were wearing like a mesh with little holes in it, jumpsuit, the boy and the girl. And then somebody had a safety pin there, and they were doing a dance together, and they got stuck. They couldn't detach themselves because there was a safety pin that was, you know, clinging to the other person's costume. But I had that happen in Paris too. It was the Alcazar. I know I'm just reminiscing, but it was a cabaret show I got to do for a few weeks. And so we had vegetable hats and a very small gangplank. And of course I was taller than everybody, so they were always elbowing me out of the way. But while we were on stage, it was La Salade Niçoise, which is a famous salad they make in the south of France. But everybody was vegetable. And the hats, my onion hat had antenna, and the other girl was a tomato, and her antenna got intertwined, and we didn't know, and we were just stepping side to side, you know, and it was like the showgirl type thing, and the man in the tuna fish costume, he bought his big can of tuna fish, and he noticed it, and he unhooked us, and I realized then that otherwise we would have been like Siamese twins, trying to run up a gangplank that was really narrow, you know, so two people wouldn't have been able to do it. Anyway, those funny situations, you know, stay with you because, you know, there's always something unexpected, but you have to be ready for that. And of course, you know, things that happen on stage, someone has to keep dancing regardless, or sometimes somebody doesn't show up who's supposed to be there. And the reverse is, an interesting story that one of my teachers told us who worked with Martha Graham, both Bertram Ross and I want to talk about that a little bit, Stuart Hose, who just passed away. He was 98, and I was in one of his dances as well. But they told us in the middle of class about Martha Graham that there was one time when, because she never told her age, which is understandable, when you get to a certain place and you want to keep dancing, you don't tell your age. But so she was down on the floor in her, well-known fourth position, with one knee is in front of the other, and she couldn't get up. And the two male dancers saw that she wasn't getting up when she was supposed to. So they each lifted her from one under the arm like a rickshaw. She kept her position and they went off stage, like they were carrying a rickshaw between them. And they, obviously changed her choreography, but they got her off the stage. Otherwise she would have still been there like, and people would have had to come in for the next thing. So, those little stories are always very interesting. Because it shows the human side of what goes on, and that the performers are people, and there are different things that can happen and go wrong, and that's what makes for the common denominator. They're not these never creatures, floating around.
Well, now you have this production in June. So when do you start working? When did these dancers come here? Are they here now?
No, now they're back in New York, but they were here in late April, and then I'll be going, I go back to New York a few times to rehearse, and then my assistant director takes over when I'm not always there, which is really helpful because it's a lot, to produce.
So they are rehearsing now.
Yes.
With your assistant director.
Yes.
And you will be going down periodically,
yes.
And they will rehearse with you.
Right.
So for a couple of days, they're doing a lot of work.
Well, they only rehearse about 3 times a week right now.
Oh, okay.
Because they have other jobs and, the expense of paying them and everything, So we condense as much as possible. As a matter of fact, I've learned in the last few years that I can do a lot more in less time. Years ago, we used to rehearse like 4 or 5 times a week, and everybody was nervous about things, but I'm more confident now because I have an assistant who's Nina Deacon, and the dancers are very cooperative, and I think they're starting to see that there's something in it for them. In the same way that for the performers, there should be something of value for them doing these works, I feel the same for transmitting that to the audience, that hopefully they will appreciate, they always like certain things more than the other, but there's such a variety and versatility in my repertory that I think it'll be interesting for people who have never even attended a modern dance concert. So that's what I enjoy doing. It's not like it's only one style. I mean, obviously my imprint probably shows up when people have seen my work, just like with a painter or musician or composer, they always have certain little imprints of their personality or style that creep up. But I do feel that it's important to have there's something in it for everyone, and that they can glean something of value through the art that we're presenting and for the artists themselves who are in this. So that's why I enjoy working with dancers who seem to be understanding and learning little by little what I'm about, because each choreographer has their own idiosyncrasies. So dancers, to me, are wonderful traveling psychologists. That's what I call them behind the scenes. Why? Because they have to be so flexible, and each personality is so vastly different, and each choreographer has a different way of approaching movement. So they become very flexible mentally, I think. So in addition to what they say about the plasticity of the brain when someone works in the arts, or even for children, they also have a plasticity of some kind, I would say, in dealing with many different personalities, and that's certainly a wonderful trait to have and develop, regardless of what job they go on to. So I think that's another hidden aspect of what it is to be a dancer, and of course they have to do many different jobs. None of us have enough funding to give them a big contract, and even the big companies, might have a season at City Center and then they're closed for 7 or 8 months till they get the next grant. the dancers are scattered.
So you have a team of how many people now that are going to work in June? Four people.
Yes.
And
myself.
have several of those been with you before, or
Yes.
do you try to get a new group every?
Well, depending on who's available, there's always a rotating group. I have a very international group, but some had to go back for their visa. Other people are doing other jobs, because it's seasonal. But they come back. Different people come back. When someone says, how many do you have? I say, it depends on the day. And I say, it's like when people that have a lot of children in the family and they don't know where they all are, maybe somewhere else, but they'll come back, eventually. So it's very interesting. I have to be flexible as well, because I can't offer them a year contract. Very few companies can anyway, even the best. So that's part of the dancer's dilemma, so to speak. But then again, only the fittest will survive. I always say those who know what the parameters are and what the difficulties are, but they have to really love it, and you know that they really are committed when they continue. And I think it's a great attribute, because I know what they go through, and I understand that, having done that myself. And so it really shows the resilience of the performer, to at least, it continues for a while. I'm sure they get to a certain point or a certain age where they say, I've had enough of this, But if you don't tell your age, it doesn't matter. So that's part of the key, for me anyway, to continue.
So they're working in the city, they come up here, and they stay at an Airbnb, and they try out for the different parts.
Well, they already had the parts. I had already.
Oh, they already
auditioned.
have the parts,
Yeah,
so they come
right.
up here in the beginning and they work. Then they go back to the city and they work with your assistant and they work with you, and then they come back up here
for a whole weekend.
for a whole weekend.
Yeah, a day before the show they rehearse.
And then that's it.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh, I'm short of breath just thinking about it. And then they're going to enjoy it. They're going to have all the dancing and the live music and the live audience, and it's a Woodstock and
Right.
all of those things, and then they go back to the city.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I remember years ago I performed with my company at the Woodstock Playhouse before it burned down. I don't know the exact year because I dropped a few years here and there, but I remember how wonderful it was. I didn't live here then, but I have great fond memories about how when we arrived, and it was just such a nice low-key atmosphere at the Woodstock Playhouse compared to what a theater might be in New York. And I'm not talking about Broadway theaters, but it's just that everybody was so relaxed, and so happy. So we weren't used to that. But it was a pleasure, because that was in the days of Harris Gordon, who was the owner, and really he did a lot for dance. I've spoken about that maybe before, but he really promoted all different styles of dance, and especially in the summer. So Woodstock at that time was known to have, what they call summer stock in the theater world. It wasn't exactly that, but many different groups were brought here. And I do want to say that the wonderful Woodstock Playhouse has always been, for me, the emblem of Woodstock, which, by the way, in case you didn't know it, is called the Colony of the Arts. That is the official name of Woodstock. So those of you who are new here, please pay attention and know that we really welcome you, and we hope that you'll support the arts, because that's really what this whole town is about. And actually, I want to say that it's probable that, I know in Kingston they're doing wonderful things and providing grants, but the problem is that in Woodstock, or at least up until recently, everybody's an artist. So if they favored certain people with a grant from town, then the other people would be annoyed, so they don't have any grants. But that's okay, because eventually maybe we will have a turnabout where there'll be more support, at least for events. And the Woodstock Chamber of Commerce and the Arts does try to have a wonderful website now where the groups that are registered as members can have their own information brought forward and kept up to date with pictures. So once they're back up and running, the Woodstock Chamber of Commerce will have information about Linda Diamond and Company that you can tell your friends to look for, as well as other events. And it's also important to tell each other, oh, did you know such and such is going to be performing, or there's a music group. The word of mouth is very important. I know that we have the Hudson Valley One newspaper continues, but it's not the same as the Woodstock Times used to be, where there would be a calendar of events that was more comprehensive. And of course, it has to do with the online information that people can look for. But for those who are visiting Woodstock, and especially if you're here on the weekends or you have friends coming in, please, make it your effort to inform them of all the different wonderful things that will be going on in the summer, including the Woodstock Diamond Dance and Music Festival, which is June 10th and 11th. And you can call up to find about ticket prices. And on public television, we're not allowed to talk about those things. But otherwise, we're allowed to talk about anything else.
May I talk to you about the costumes?
Oh, sure.
Now, understand that you do a lot of the costumes yourself. Do you have like a costume closet where you have all these costumes
That's
from
a good
years
question.
past?
You can come visit. I have it all out in the open, backstage in the wings. It's wonderful. I got several things on wheels because the carpenter who put something up, it kept falling down once we hung everything. So it's kind of like a library. And if I have things packed away, then I don't know what's there, but when it's out in the open, it's kind of like with the painter who has an easel and the paint's there, and they say, oh, I think I'll use a little of this, I'll use a little of that. That's kind of the way I am when I say, oh, we need a little turquoise scarf here, so I grab it, and I wrap it around.
So you have the clothes.
Yeah, they're on wheels.
They're on wheels, and are they
Backstage.
packed in plastic so you
No,
can
no,
see
no,
them?
no. Plastic isn't good for the heat.
So it's open.
Yeah,
But
they
it's-
breathe. Yeah.
Wow.
And it's great because I have certain things, like the way I categorize it, I might have I love gold and silver, and sometimes you get these metallic items. So, there might be like the metallic things, and then there's something for those different circus costumes, which I change. Each time I do a show, I kind of, shift with the costumes for that House of Fun part, and depending on the size of the dancers. And then we have like all black for certain dances, and then we just see who fits into what. Now, many of those I realized I purchased years ago. There were thrift shops that had the most wonderful, some of them are even designer things, because someone said, look, this says Ralph Lauren, and they were so impressed. I said, that was probably from a thrift shop. I didn't even notice the label. But really high quality things that they don't make anymore. In those days, people like in the late 80s, early 90s, 100 years ago, anyway, for those of you who weren't born.
So what you have is you've got at least a library
Yes.
of costumes.
Yes,
And it goes back for several decades.
yes.
So you've got quite a little collection there.
Yeah, I don't get rid of anything unless it's really falling apart. It has no hope. But I even have my pollera, which is from Panama. I've been wanting to redo this dance based on a piece I had done called Panamanian Suite. And I had that when I was 18. My mother gave it to me, or 17 maybe, in college. And so I took it to a wonderful lady named Molly, who's at Rock City Vintage, which is right here. She's a great dressmaker, but she learned how to restore things. And there was something that had like a little hole or something. And she knows how to repair and restore.
Where is she now?
She's right there. She's at that little tiny store when you come down Rock City Road on the right, just before the stop sign. She has a little corner there. And she told me that she learned, she started out doing wedding dresses or something, which she really didn't like, but it taught her a lot about how to, do intricate
Well, because
work.
she was Rock City Vintage, and that became a restaurant.
Oh, that other one? Oh, yeah, then she moved. So now she has a very small place with very select items, but she also is a wonderful dressmaker. And she has these skills that, not everybody has the knowledge of how to restore old things, and I hold on to everything. So if it's something that could be, repaired in some way, I found her. And
So when I'm really curious about this. When the show is over and all the pomp and ceremony and the circumstance and the parties and the dancing and everything, everybody's gone back home, how do you preserve these clothes?
I wash some of them by hand.
But
I'm the one
are
that
they?
does
They're
the
still on these clothes. They're still on these closet racks that have wheels.
Yes, but
And then do you have them in rooms with the doors shut and the windows shut, What
No,
do you do?
It's just a big open, the theater's an open space, and when we have private classes or rehearsals and it's cold, we have a pellet stove. But otherwise, you know how people used to take things for cold storage? Well, someone
Yeah.
told me it's very good if things are hanging without plastic in a cold room. That's the best way to preserve them.
And that's what you do?
Yeah.
Well, along with the fur coats,
Well, I
the
don't
cold
have to-
storage.
Yeah.
Yes. So your clothes, your costumes get the same respect that a fur coat from the 80s gets.
I guess
Wow.
so, yeah. It wasn't
Yes.
intended. But as I said, you know, I don't like packing things in boxes because, first of all, they get all wrinkled, but also you don't know what's what, and then it's
Right.
all pushed in. So this way, everything is visual. I'm very visual. I need to see things, and then I know exactly where they are.
Now,
because
what about the shoes?
They don't wear shoes. That's the wonderful thing about our field, that once in a while, if they're on a floor that's a little rough, they have to wear, you know, some kind of dance sandal or ballet shoe. But no, we work barefoot, and we have a beautiful bamboo stage floor, which was put in a number of years ago, and it's sprung, as they call it. It's on several layers. There's like pressure-treated wood, and then something else, and then the bamboo, which is very user-friendly. So that's why when Catspan, the well-known center in Tivoli, they were originally going to have only ballet companies, I believe, but then it was so expensive because ballet companies actually, they wear their their point shoes once, and then they have to get rid of them and get another pair for the next show because that's how much they wear out. But we don't have to worry about that expense. So it's helpful. So it's, you know, barefoot.
How do modern dancers take care of their feet?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. I wrote a chapter about that in my upcoming memoir. The last thing people think about at the end of a busy day of rehearsing and taking class is your feet, and those are the feet need the most attention. You know, that's a good question. I guess we don't wear point shoes, so we don't have the problems that people who have to wear those full-time have, you know, because it really compresses the foot, even though I love the style. And, you know, eventually the feet start to, you know, like my foot doctor was just trimming my toenails and said, you really sacrificed your feet. And I don't think it was a sacrifice at all, you know, because they really have been strong because of the kind of training I've had. And they've helped me, you know, recover from a few surgeries. And I have to say that they've given me a good foundation. But I don't know about the other dancers, but, you know, I would say if people want some ideas, olive oil or coconut oil is really great, you know, to just heal your feet with a basic natural.
Well, now, do dancers as a rule get their feet massaged every week?
No, they don't have money for that.
Do they massage their own feet every
they
week?
have these little roller things. I've seen people where they roll their feet, their arches on it, and then everybody has their own idiosyncrasy. In the same way that when they come here to Woodstock, I give them a per diem because I know myself that, you know, I have my own way of eating, and certain things I don't eat and certain things I need to have. So each dancer, they really like that because, you know, sometimes you're given food that you're not supposed to be eating or that you're allergic to. As a matter of fact, I remember years ago in Miami, I was in a new opera called Daisy based on the Girl Scout founder. And they said, they took us from Miami to Fort Myers on a bus, and they bought us Kentucky Fried Chicken. Well, we all had indigestion by the time we got there. I have never touched that again. I mean,
Right.
I normally wouldn't buy it, but I mean, that was like the worst thing to give dancers, whether they're on a trip or otherwise. And the other time was the Department of Cultural Affairs had given me a grant and a performance, and so the very nice lady running it, who wasn't a dance person at all, she came into the green room with orange juice and cookies. And I said, oh no. And the male dancer who had to open in the first duet with me, he ate the cookies and the orange juice, and I know orange juice is very hard to digest. So he had a terrible stomachache when he got out there. It didn't take long. So, you know, dancers are fussy about their food for good reason because, you know, their instrument is what is creating the art. And that in turn depends on, you know, the food intake, the type of food and what they have to avoid, so that, because, you know, the stomach has its own little nervousness, even if the person doesn't think they have butterflies. You know, there is a certain angst before people go on stage, you know, even like me coming here today, you know, I didn't want to talk to anyone, I had to move around and, you know, our preparation.
Well, now in your memoir, did you talk about diet?
Not yet, but I'm talking about a lot of other things.
I think
but
if you haven't
that's
finished your memoir, it would
No, I
make a
haven't.
great chapter.
Oh, really?
Oh,
About
absolutely.
the
I would
different
be
types of
one
food.
very interested.
Really? Thank
Oh,
you
of
for
course.
suggesting that. Yeah, because if you've ever made the mistake like I did one time, was on the way to the Rhinebeck Center for Performing Arts, not too many years ago, we stopped at this place, and I don't know why, I had these nuts and then coffee with honey, and I'll never do that again. Okay, so that's the end of that chapter. But, you know, there's certain things you have to avoid and certain things that...
Yeah, I think that's something that
That's a
people
great
should know.
idea.
Listen, we have got 5 minutes left.
Can I
So
show
can
it?
I please have the picture again?
Yes,
Can we
definitely.
talk about how to get in touch with you? Can we talk about where to get tickets? All those things.
Yes. So the telephone number is 845-679-7757, and you can call for more information and reservations. Also, I would like to say that we have handicapped seating and parking, especially if people call in advance. You can have a reserved section. So we're entirely handicap accessible, and we rent a handicapped bathroom that will be in front by the side of the theater. And we hope you'll come to the pre-performance reception at 5:30 on Saturday, June 10th. And we're hoping to have outdoor live music there prior to the show. And then Saturday is that main show, which starts at 6. And Sunday will be a 2:30 matinee for people who prefer the daytime. And we hope you'll come and tell your friends. 845-679-7757. Thank you.
Linda, it has been such a wonderful pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you.
And I'm going to ask you now, before the end of the program, before the end of the 5 minutes, can we have another program after all of this is over and all the stress is gone and everything? I want a program where we talk about how to talk about your feet, what kind of exercises dancers need, what kind of diet.
How to get your stomach.
Yeah, all of those things.
Oh, that would be
because
fun.
those are the secrets. And the makeup, listen, and I want to know all of those things.
Okay,
So,
great. That would be fun.
and so now if we're down to almost nothing, I'm going to thank Miss Ellen. Thank you very,
Yes.
very much, Ellen. This was great. We loved this program. And thank you so much for our resident psychiatrist who brings in all the goodies. And thank you again, and I look forward to our next program.
Oh, me too. Thank you, Thurman. It was wonderful. It was a pleasure.